Okay, let's get the show on the road, folks. Calm yourselves down. I know you're excited. Okay, so welcome to Glasgow Skeptics in the Pub. First of all, show of hands. If you've ever been to a Glasgow Skeptics in the Pub event before, stick your hand up. Nice one. All right, good on you. Well done, everyone. If it's your first time at a Glasgow Skeptics event, give me your hand, please. Wow, fair amount of newbies. I'm sure you're not just here for these people to the right of me. I'm sure you're here for the skepticism, but, welcome to you guys, and we hope you come back. Just to give you a little bit of information about ourselves, Glasgow Skeptics is a non-commercial organisation committed to promoting science and understanding, freedom of expression, and critical thinking. To boil that down, we have events such as this one. This is maybe a little bit out of the ordinary, where we tend to bring speakers in and they tell us stuff and we listen and we learn and we critically evaluate whether what they're saying is true or not, and we subject them to a rigorous but polite Q&A. So we're kind of going to do something like that today. The variety of talks that we've done in the past, you can look at our webpage for more information, our events and all that. If you want to add us on Facebook and Twitter and all that jiggery-pokery, if you can't find Glasgow Skeptics on Google, then you're a lost cause, okay? For those of you the first time here, the exits are there and there, okay? In the instance of a fire, blah, 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 blah. Don't do anything dangerous, okay? I know it's hot in here, okay? Sorry. Feel free to remove clothing to the point of excitement. After that, I'm afraid you just have to be warm. We do have a fan at the back. We don't want to switch it on because it's incredibly loud, okay? But if worst comes to worst, then we will do so, okay? All right? So come and have a quiet word with us if you're about to have, some kind of fit or something, then give us a warning, okay? So what we're doing tonight, as I said, is a little bit out of our comfort zone for a start, because rather than having one or two people up telling us about a specific topic, we've got two different groups of people who've come up to talk about the same topic, but probably from a very, very different viewpoint. So what I would ask you guys in the audience is, I want you to apply to the best of your abilities the skills of critical thinking and try and evaluate that what you hear this evening is true and what is false, and call people out on it appropriately. But we're not going to do that in pantomime fashion. There will be no heckling, etc. during the talk, okay? I've got a crack team of shushers in the corner there. Can we have a shush, please? All right? Okay, so we're going to remain nice and polite. You will have your chance to have your say during the Q&A. When the Q&A comes along, we would like you to ask questions. We would not like you to stand up in a soapbox and give us your views on the world, okay? Keep the questions short and simple and snappy. We've got an amazing moderator tonight who's going to make sure you do that anyway. And also, you can be tweeting about it, okay? So hashtag GSEUREF, that's GS for Glasgow Skeptics, yay. EU for... Yeah, you guessed the rest, okay? So please, let's have plenty of tweets going on. Nothing rude, no abuse, please. Again, we want to focus on facts and not people, okay? And on the subject of facts, my crack team of shushers aren't just brilliant at shushing, okay? Those little boards you see at the back there, the white paper, we're going to be doing fact-checking. So if any of the lovely people to my right here say something outrageous and crazy, we're going to write it down and we're going to fact-check it. And we've got green pens and we've got red pens, okay? If anybody's colourblind, then we'll sort that out as we go along, okay? All right? But we want to try and hold people to account to make sure the things that they are saying are true. No pressure, gentlemen. Okay, so in the interest of moving on, I want to hand over now to our moderator for the day. He did such a brilliant job at our recent MSP hustings that we've got him back, mostly because he didn't drink too much, he didn't block us on Twitter, and he's got nothing better to do on a Monday night. So can we have a warm Glasgow Skeptics round of applause, please, for Dr. Mark Shephard.
Thank you all very much for coming out. I know it's a hot night, and it's great to see. I love this event. It's great to see so many people interested in politics, and we've got a really interesting debate going on tonight. Remember, the vote takes place on the 23rd of June. Even if you have not registered, you can do so by tomorrow. Tomorrow is close of play for registration, and you can go to aboutmyvote.co.uk to find out more information about registration and all those kind of things. So if you aren't registered, I know both campaigns will be very keen for you to register and get involved. It's a very, very close one, this one, so I can imagine it's going to be very, very interesting debate. It's a very crucial debate for both sides. We've got The poll of polls is Remain at the minute. This is you can go on to What the UK Thinks, and they've got a poll of polls, a running average, and then they've got polling company by polling company, and there's also commentary and analysis. At the moment, the poll of polls has Remain at 49 and Leave at 51 if you take out the don't knows. The ICM poll for June the 5th had Remain at 43, Leave at 48, don't know at 9%. So the don't know is going to be very, very interesting here. June the 3rd, YouGov poll had Remain at 41 and Leave at 45 with don't know at 11%. Let's dive on in. Tonight we've got, and I'm going to start from the end furthest away from me, I've got Dr. Alex Mantzaris. I hope I've pronounced that correctly, who's also, sorry, I'm Mark Shephard from the University of Strathclyde. Alex Mantzaris is also from the University of Strathclyde. He is a researcher in the chemistry department, but has very much worked in the mathematics department. And he's here to represent both his own views in terms of why we should leave, but also he is connected to the Leave.eu campaign and then also Vote Leave campaign. And then next to him is George Laird, who was a fitness instructor at Glasgow University. He does the blogspot Glasgow Uni Human Rights. So he's, as well as training elite athletes, he also has got his own blog site. He's also a member of the Labour Party and has worked in the Pollock constituency in Govan Ward. And so that's George Laird in the white shirt there. And then next to George is Patrick Harvie, who's co-convener of the Scottish Green Party, who's been a member of the Scottish Parliament for Glasgow region. He's been elected 4 times. He's been an MSP since 2003, so a 4-time victory. That's pretty impressive. And he'll be representing the Britain Stronger in Europe, or providing arguments for the Remain camp. And then Robert Henthorn, closest to me here, is from NUS Scotland. He's the Vice President of Education. He's a trade unionist. He's a singer, and he gets very angry. So I've got him next to me so I can keep him under control. It is hot in here, so just, keep it calm. We are all human beings, and we all do live on the bigger planet, and we do love each other, really. So without further ado, I'm going to start. What I'm going to do is I'm going to alternate, so we don't just hear from the Leave side twice and then the Remain side twice. I'm going to alternate it so we can keep it as fair as possible, get a little bit of flavour of everything. So it's going to be a bit of marble cake. And so we're going to start with Dr. Alex Mantzaris. So Alex, what you've got, the way we're going to operate this is that they're going to have a couple of minutes to put why they believe what they believe in terms of the EU referendum and what they think you should be doing in terms of voting. And then what we're going to do is open this up for questions. Okay, so very brief go from each person for a couple of minutes. And the order we're going to do this is Alex, and then we're going to go to Patrick, and then we're going to go back to George, and then back to Rob, so we get a little bit of flavour of each. All right? Alex, over to you.
So, thank you for inviting me. So, I'll cut right into the first moment where I became a Eurosceptic. So, after finishing my PhD in the University of Edinburgh, my first academic post was in the robotics lab where I was on an EU project. So, the EU projects in academia are funded mostly through something called FP7. So these are very large-scale interdisciplinary projects, cross-university, cross-country universities, with large budgets, etc., that do some great research and everything. So this was my first academic post, and it was really nice and very exciting. It was a very expensive project. I didn't know that these kind of numbers were being tossed around because most of the PhD and previous postdoc projects I knew had much smaller budgets. So then when trying to complete the project and wrapping the project up, the bureaucracy was the something else. And it was from this point onwards, when trying to cut through and wrapping up these projects, as many people on these European projects know, there was a lot of man hours for bureaucracy. A very high overhead that was tedious, and that tedious sensation remained with me. So the tediousness from that project stayed with me, and it was from that moment on, I always had an ear open for when I would hear about sort of difficulties that other people had encountering EU projects. So it was from that point onwards when I had a slow build-up of my Euroscepticism and wondering how this organization works. Because previous to this, I thought it was just a set of trade tariffs. So I thought it was just a series of trade tariffs. But then I later learned that it is much more than this. So from that point onwards until now, I've been accumulating information and experiences, and I'll be happy to share more with them if you have any specific questions.
Thank you very much. Patrick.
Thanks very much, and thanks for the invitation to another Skeptics event. There's a wee infographic that's been doing the rounds on Twitter. It says the history of Europe goes like this: war, 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 creation of the European Union, arguments about bananas. Now, that's boiling it down to a wee bit too much simplicity for this audience, I'm sure. But the creation of a range of institutions, I would say the Court of Justice, the Court of Human Rights, the Convention of Human Rights are every bit as important in this project as the European Union. The creation of a range of institutions after the Second World War have brought us to a position where we, this incredibly lucky generation, have had 70 years of peace between European nations. I don't think that we can walk away from that with any sense of pride in what we're doing or with any sense of optimism about the future. I don't think we can walk away from an institution which allows us, and sometimes when necessary compels us as European nations to work together on issues which transcend borders, from climate change to terrorism to global security, cybersecurity. A whole range of issues require cooperation, necessitate cooperation across borders. To walk away from that would be perverse. The European Union is wildly imperfect. I am not going to try and persuade you that it's the best European Union it could be or the best institutions it could be. The UK is wildly imperfect as well. And one of the arguments I find most baffling in this European referendum debate that we've had so far is that the EU is undemocratic. This coming from right-wing members of a UK Parliament in which a government has an overall majority in the House of Commons with about a third of the votes in the election, and with the ability to appoint people to the House of Lords who haven't been elected to anything in their lives. The UK's constitution is profoundly undemocratic. The European institutions have been gradually getting better. The Parliament has been given more power in recent years. The Commission still needs its wings clipped, and I would like to see the Parliament being given the chance to initiate and amend legislation rather than just wait for the Commission to propose it. I'd like to see as well the role of member state governments changed, because a great deal of what the European Union has moved away from, the profoundly positive record of social protection, workplace protection, environmental protections, the reasons why some of that agenda has been lost is the election of right-wing governments in member states. Is not the result of the structure of the European Union itself. And if we want to re-win that argument for a socially just, progressive, peaceful and democratic Europe, the last thing we need to do is walk away from it and see that project, that post-Second World War project, begin to unravel. There's a great deal that we need to do to win the argument that another Europe is possible, not the one David Cameron is offering, and certainly not the one Boris Johnson has in mind, where we would see our workplace protections, our environmental protections, our social protections torn up. So I want to ask you not to be complacent about the result in Scotland, which is likely to be pro-Remain. I would like to persuade you to get out there and campaign for as many Remain votes as possible in the final few weeks of the campaign, because it's every single vote across these islands that will matter, not just the overall balance in Scotland, much as I may wish that we were making some of these decisions for ourselves.
George.
Good evening. I'm very happy to be invited along this evening to speak on behalf of Vote Leave and Leave.eu. I'd like to give you a number just to start off with. Since 1973, we have paid £500 billion to the EU. We are the political losers and we are the financial losers every single year we remain a member of the EU. To put it into context, the EU is not a country. It's not a superstate. The EU is a political organisation which Britain holds a membership. 50,000 people work in the EU, but 1 in 5 of those people earn more than the Prime Minister of Great Britain. The EU is a massive gravy train, and as Patrick says, it's not perfect. It's imperfect, and it's unaccountable, and the people that run it are unelected by us, and we have no right to change what they are doing. Whereas if we go to the Holyrood or the Westminster elections, we at least have the opportunity to remove bad politicians. We cannot do that in the European Union. That is not how the system works. As Patrick said, the European Parliament can initiate, propose or repeal EU law. That is a disgrace. Everybody in this room that believes in democracy cannot for 1 second believe that this organisation, which costs an absolute fortune, do you know that there are 751 MEPs at the European Parliament, and on average they cost us each year £1.79 million, and that story is available to read in the Daily Telegraph. We need to leave for our own national and economic security. And I'm here today to put that case to yourselves. And I believe when you read the facts and when you start to research and when you take the time to consider and make an informed choice, you will agree with us and vote to leave. Thank you.
So I want to start by agreeing in many ways that the EU is vast and complicated. It's a huge power that is often very distant from the people that it serves. And so for the purposes of this debate, this discussion, I want to focus on the way in which the EU has huge impacts on our communities, in our workplaces, in our day-to-day lives, wherever we are in Scotland or in the UK. The battle to win extended rights for workers in Europe has been a long one. But in that time, some important legislation has been passed, and as a direct result of our membership of the EU, workers in the UK have won a litany of protected rights, from establishing minimum entitlement to maternity leave and pay, as well as protection from dismissal for pregnant workers. Workers have the right to unpaid leave to care for their dependents. EU directives have ensured that part-time, fixed-term and agency workers are entitled to equal treatment on issues such as pay, leave and working conditions, things that are so much more important for our generation of precarious workers and uncertain futures than they ever were before. EU legislation has extended protection from discrimination to employees on the grounds of disability, age, sexual orientation, religion and belief, and the Working Time Directive for the first time introduced the right to paid holidays for all employees and introduced a maximum working week of 48 hours. More important than all of this, the Information and Consultation Directive and later the Transfer of Undertakings regulations embedded the right for workers to be consulted and for negotiation to take place around businesses like making redundancies, reevaluating jobs, restructuring their organisations, making sure that workers had a secure place to negotiate from when their conditions were under threat. Now, it's not clear which of these rights would be revoked if the UK voted to leave the EU. But if you look at the Conservative manifesto and comments made by Tory MPs and others campaigning to leave, it's very clear that our rights in the workplace are under threat. And the trade union legislation introduced recently only makes that clearer. But the astonishing thing that has emerged during this referendum, the clear victory for the European project, is that these things are protected through our membership of the EU. Even David Cameron and George Osborne, hardly proponents of trade union rights and security for workers, are out campaigning for a settlement which embeds these protections for workers into law and for people who live in our country. The EU has bound these protections that we enjoy to a settlement that our government is eager to be part of, even when it stands in direct contravention of the other things they are trying to achieve. We are protected by the EU, and our membership of the EU is what makes those things possible. Coming from the National Union of Students, I want to make sure that I talk a little bit about education as well. And I think it's really important that we see this debate as one about opportunity and the future of our membership in the EU. UK universities receive an additional 15% funding from the EU on top of what they get from the UK government. Most of this is for research and development, but the UK receives the second largest share of EU research funding. The Erasmus programme, which is the EU's flagship student mobility scheme, sent 14,500 UK students abroad in the year 2012-13. That number is only climbing. I was, a couple of weeks ago, an event hosted by the European Student Union, which is the NUS of NUSs for Europe. But it doesn't just cover the EU. It covers the entire European higher education area, which includes countries like Serbia and I'm trying to think of others, Norway, Switzerland, many others outside the EU as well. And the students I met from countries where their governments aren't members of the European Union were baffled as to why any young person, any person in education, could even entertain the idea of the UK no longer being a member. They could not understand why students would turn down the opportunities of mobility, for studying elsewhere, for working elsewhere, and getting the funding to do it. Our institutions getting the funding to support that sort of international mobility that opens up opportunities for us. This debate is about the future of the UK, but it's also about the future of people who live here and the opportunities they enjoy, and that's what I hope you're considering tonight.
Thank you very much. What I love about these events is we do have a mixture of an audience with lots of different views, because I can see that by the clapping. What I would like, if you've got a brand new question, it's like this. If you want to follow on from something that somebody's already said, give me a C for continuation, okay? So brand new question, or I just want to continue, because people get frustrated if they can't, they had a point, but we've now moved on to some other topic or something and they've missed their chance. So that's how we'll do it. I'll take a couple of questions. So it's over to you, however you want to, anybody got a question? I'll take these two questions first and then we'll move on. Yes, you sir were first, yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of play devil's advocate to the point. So, Patrick, you mentioned that the EU was a conduit to peace, and George, you mentioned that leaving the EU was better for our national security. Is it not ideas rather than institutions which keep us safe, and that we're all liberal, democratic societies to various degrees nowadays? I think we don't necessarily need a political union, we have the shared idea.
Before we get an answer there, George, other question back there. Yes, you, sir.
I was wondering, being a European citizen, you get a lot of...
Can you give it a bit of Brian Blessed, a bit of a boom? Give me a boom! Yeah.
So, being European citizens, we're entitled to, we have rights that extend beyond being national citizens. I'm quite concerned that as a result of Brexit, I'm going to lose rights that I quite enjoy and would like to keep it, and I'm going to lose them through no fault of my own. By, in my opinion, I'm uninterested, uninformed, and narrow-minded with the British public.
George and Alex, I'll let you have a go on that because they were both probably directed at you, and then we'll move it on.
Okay. I'll go. Yeah. Somebody raised the issue of national security. When I was younger, I used to be in the Royal Military Police down in Chichester. The only way that you can have security or enhanced security is to have total control of your borders, to regulate who comes in and who goes out. If you do not have that, as you've seen in Paris, as you've seen in Belgium, as you've seen in Berlin...
From Brussels!
Sorry?
The terrorists in Belgium, they did it from Brussels.
Yeah. Well, thank you. If you don't have control of your borders, but the point about the people from Belgium is that they actually crossed borders to go into France, as you.
They were Poland being.
Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, the only way you can have your national security enhanced is to have borders to regulate people coming in and coming out of your country.
All right, so I would like to address all those points specifically. So first of all, the rights for workers were
Alex, do you want to just take the microphone?
So first of all, the rights for the workers were introduced by the trade unions here, as George very well knows. If with these EU laws for the trade unions and for the workers' rights were so good and so well to protect the workers, why is it that we see the unemployment rates skyrocketing in Greece? Why is it that in over 40 cities in France right this moment, we have incredible riots that the media is actually blackening out? There was reported today that more than 40 cities with more than 200,000 people protesting. Where are the EU laws to protect these people? Even the nuclear power plants are on strike. The EU, those nuclear power plants from EDF are on strike. I can even pull out the news article right here for you if I can find it amongst all these things that I've got. But the EU laws are more like a cloud and a promise that we've never actually seen them in action. There's not one single country where we've seen unemployment increase and the EU to step in. Not even one. It's a cloud, it's an idea. It actually hasn't been grounded. The UK's trade union, the strikes for all those years and the periods of struggle brought those laws, and we have seen them put in action here. We have not seen them put in action across. And that is one of the reasons for sovereignty, is to keep the tradition here. The second of all, for the peace on the ideas, do you know that we have an EU army being built? Do you know that this is one of the provocations with Russia? That a lot of the ships, the UK ships, are being sent close to the borders on the coast with St. Petersburg. These are provocations, and the issues in Ukraine do not show a situation of peace.
One of the things about the EU, about keeping the peace, if you look at Bosnia and places like that, it hasn't really worked out particularly well. And if you look at the riots in France, the riots in Belgium, you can see actually that the European Union is actually starting to break down.
This gentleman here had a follow-on point, yeah.
Yeah, quite a bit about the EU army. UK has a veto on that, and our military is only being used because we want it to be used. But about the borders, I remember the IRA running around blowing up parts of London and Manchester. And we control the border between the Republic and Northern Ireland and access to mainland UK. Now, if we're going to control borders, then we have to have close borders between the Republic and Northern Ireland. Otherwise, that would be a conduit through for potential terrorists. Now, is this what Stronger Leave are proposing? Because that would seem to be a requirement.
So, first of all, about the EU army, if that was a veto, then how come that the new tanks for the UK will be built in Spain?
Because that's an economic decision that the UK government...
If that was a veto, and that was a veto being held, these steps would not be seen.
Sorry, this is conflation. This is a veto about not where stuff is procured, but how the army is used. And you're talking about deployment of military assets, and that is at the discretion of the UK government because they have a veto on whether UK forces are used or not. You're completing procurement with use.
No, it's another thing for production. Production is a complement of sovereignty.
We're talking about not where the EU army was procuring its military equipment from, but whether it's going to be used. And the UK government has a veto over whether any British military personnel are going to be used. They can veto that entirely.
Patrick wants in. Patrick, and I've got two follow-on questions and two brand new questions. I've got a third follow-on question, so we're building up. Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it was inevitable that there were going to be some arguments used tonight that I would find pretty staggering. I've already got quite a list in my head just in these last 10 minutes or so, and I'm not going to be able to address them all. I think the idea that what has happened to Greece is a result of the achievement of workers' protection, the social chapter, the working time directive, maternity and paternity leaves, or trade union rights is simply bewildering. What has happened to Greece and the rest of the wider failure of a hard-right economic model which has become dominant in recent decades is not to be laid at the door of the people who've suffered at the brunt of austerity economics. The idea that we return the power over many of those issues to a UK government which is already trying to strip workers of their rights under trade union legislation simply would be an act of self-harm, in my view, to the people of this country. The wider argument about security, I I like the way that you framed the question. There is something cultural, something more than just merely structural about how we achieve greater security, a more peaceful world. But I would argue that that is fundamentally achieved by working together, by ensuring that we have a degree of social solidarity that transcends national identity, transcends national borders, and transcends national governments as well. The European Union, at its best, has achieved that sense of solidarity. It doesn't always, but I want to contribute to, and I want this country to contribute to a European Union that is more likely to achieve that, rather than one that is throwing up the fences and spending its money on dogs and guards to try and harass and persecute those who are merely fleeing for their lives across Europe. An issue like the refugee crisis does require a Europe-wide solution, not the Europe-wide solution that's based on forcing people back onto boats across the Mediterranean, but one that is based on compassion and human solidarity. That's the Europe that I think we are capable of building if we vote to stay in and then vote to change it.
Original questioner, you had a follow-on point.
Yeah, it was in regards to your comment on immigration in relation to national security, George.
Yep.
If we are to leave the European Union, what do you think the practical application of that is? Do we send home a Polish builder who's lived here for 3 years?
No, that is one of the scare stories from the Remain camp. This is about taking back control, regaining our sovereignty. It's not about sending people from Poland, back. It's not about sending people from Romania back. It's not about sending anybody back. What it is about us re-establishing control of our own country again. And I don't think that necessarily is a bad thing.
But I'm not saying that there has to be a policy line in the side.
Oh, there will be policies. We had immigration and asylum policies before we entered the EU in 1973. We've got those policies. And when we leave, we'll have policies on that as well. And that will be for the government of the day to decide what the direction of the country will be.
And that's why you've made a contradiction here. You're saying it would be for the government of the day to decide what the policy would be, about 20 seconds after you've basically implied that every citizen of a European Union country would still have the right to be here. Now, if it would be for the government of the day, just imagine if that government is led by Boris Johnson, by Gove, by the Brexiteers on the right wing of the Tory party. That is the kind of racist immigration policy that we would see in future if we vote to leave the European Union.
If we leave the European Union on the 23rd of June by voting to leave, then I'm sure that Patrick's aware that under Article 50 there is continuity for 2 years while there's negotiation. Are you aware of that, Patrick?
2 years, I want it for more than a lifetime.
Sorry, Patrick, you have to obey. You can't just make up law on the hoof. Yeah.
I'm not the one who's looking to leave the European Union. I am arguing that to protect people's right to move within the European Union, we stay a member of it. Look, those who argue that we can have some alternative version of a free market relationship with European Union countries while removing the right of people to choose to live where they want, removing the right of free movement of people, free movement of labour, that is only a recipe for even deeper labour exploitation than we see at the moment. Free movement of capital without free movement of people is a recipe for deeper exploitation. I'm afraid that is simply not a credible position to be arguing for.
There is no such thing as free movement of people. Because if I wish to go from here to Berlin, I actually have to pay for that. Yeah, I have to buy a passport, and I have to.
That is the result of the.
Sorry, Pat.
That is the result of the United Kingdom government's decision, not the European Union. That's the UK government's decision that made that happen.
I'm sure that your argument doesn't get any better the louder you shout. There is no such thing as freedom of movement isn't free, ladies and gentlemen. Just like free prescriptions aren't free, and we all know that. Do you know what I mean? Thank you for laughter.
We're going to go to the audience.
And can I just make one little subtle point in there? I mean, even for like the UK, even if you're not part of the EU, they have agreements for if you have a lot of money, you can pretty much, and you want to buy property in London, you can get a lot of passages. But one thing that Patrick keep mentioning is right wing, right wing, right wing, as if everyone who's on the Brexit side is right wing. Well, Patrick, that's not the case. There's a lot of people that have, well, you've used it in almost every single sentence of yours, that it is Brexit with the right wing. And even in your email, that, or your excuse Patrick, Excuse me?
It's led by the right wing. Sorry, I mean
It's not led by. George Laird. Is how many years have you been part of Labour?
Well, I joined Labour last year to do the thing. No, please, sorry. Sorry, let me just clarify a point about myself, right? Previously, I used to be in Glasgow SNP, and I'm sure Patrick probably remembers me from being in Glasgow SNP. I left the SNP, I didn't do politics for a couple of years, and I came back and I did the Better Together campaign. After the Better Together campaign in 2004, I then joined the Labour Party and I campaigned for Joanne Lamont and Pollock. I have fought against injustice all my life. That's why when I was younger, I signed up to join the Royal Military Police. Now, Patrick is obviously wishing to, shout and bawl, and that's great, Patrick, because, it makes for a very interesting, lively affair. But at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, we actually have to talk about facts. Do you know that we pay 60 times more to the EU than we do to the NHS Cancer Fund? And,
get money back.
sorry. Yes, we do get money back, but we have to actually bid for that money. And we also get a rebate. But we still pay more into the EU than we get back. We pay $5 billion for into what's called CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy, but we only receive $3 billion back from that. We are always financial losers, and we are also political losers.
So if I can use just a concrete example here, very concrete. The Strathclyde built a new building called the TIC building, Technology and Innovation Building. That was paid for by the EU. That building costed £98 million. To make sure they got the budget up to the proportion that they want, they bought very nice, expensive chairs. Each one of those chairs in that building cost £600. Those lamps on their desk cost £200. An equivalent one, the informatics building, Philosophy and Linguistics Complex, built right next to Bristow Square, next to Appleton Tower in Edinburgh, costed £44 million. Just to show the benefits of a more efficient and long-term and long-lasting economic organizations in the UK that are able to do it more efficiently. And to get this £98 million building built for Strathclyde, there was years of bidding, and it doesn't actually come with funding for the salaries. They have to rebid from the European Union to get it, and they have employees dedicated to do this process.
Don't forget, we've got the Glasgow Skeptics board with the red ink and the green ink. Rob wants in. He's not had much of a go yet, so here he goes. I am aware of, I've got about 20 hands up and I can see each and all of you, and I will try and do my best to be as fair as possible, but Rob has been quiet for a while.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in on the spirit of this Skeptics meeting to question whether we are dealing with facts, as those on the other side of the table have said it, or whether we're dealing with anecdotes and with assertions. It seems like these examples of what an efficient organisation is and how these specific organisations spend money from various sources doesn't have a great deal to do with where that money comes from or how the EU regulates spending, or indeed whether that spending is beneficial and whether it could be used better. If you wanted to make some assertions that could clarify those points, that our fact checkers could have a look at, that be really useful. And just to dispense, if we can, with the borders question, it seems we spend half of these debates talking about whether or not to close the borders and the other half arguing about whether we should even talk about closing the borders. I want to try and deal with this quickly. It doesn't seem like you've made any case against freer movement of people, the freest movement of people that's possible. At the moment, the EU provides the freest movement of people anywhere in the world between nation states. And the only assertion you've made to suggest that isn't a good thing is the idea that closing borders makes us safer. That's a very vague assertion, and if that's something the fact checkers can look into, that'd be really useful. If you'd like to make a more specific claim that they could check, that would be good as well.
I'm going to take this lady here who's been waiting patiently, yes? Sorry, the lady in front of you. I've got about 10 ahead of you as well, but we'll get round to everybody. Well, if you can keep your questions short, then everyone can get a go. Okay, thanks so much.
I feel like I should stand up because I'm really short. Something, and again you said immigration, it gets talked about a lot, and I'm not going to argue whether it's safer or whether we close it down, but something that's not really looked at from a certain point of view. Can we make a fairer immigration system? And I mean, I'm coming from the stateside, and I don't expect a lot of people on the panel or even people in the audience to know much about the immigration system in and out of the UK unless you've had to go through it yourself, because you have sad, and otherwise it doesn't really touch a lot. I wouldn't know much about the US coming in had my husband not been Scottish. And I would propose that it already is racist in itself, what we have now. Because right now we're saying, all right, what if you're in the EU and you've been living here for years, you've worked here for 10 years, and you've made a life for yourself, and if we Brexit, or you're just going to get kicked out and thrown back out to Europe. That is already happening now to people that have made their life in Britain, paid their taxes, simply because there has been so much free movement within the EU, which is positive, from the EU, that the country feels that there's not enough restriction, and the UKVA was run very, very, very badly. The government agrees to this because a couple of years ago, a lot of people don't know, the UKVA no longer exists because it was so badly run. A lot of people coming in, no measurements of people coming out, whether they were overstaying their visas and whatnot.
So immigration, the question is
can we make a fairer immigration system? Because right now people are going, oh, you have to leave, you don't make £35,000 or more, and you're not on a very short list. And people who lived here for 10 years, they've got British kids, they've got British spouses, and they're being told to leave. My husband and I barely got me in because right now, under a Westminster law, that was okay by the rest of the UK government, the sponsor must make a maximum amount of money to allow you in. It doesn't say, like the old system did, what is your income, what are your expenses, can you pay your bills without living on government subsidies. It just says, here's a number, regardless of where you are in the country.
Okay.
A London income and a Scottish income.
Absolutely.
right. Immigration, Alex.
It's already racist.
Is the system broke? Patrick, I'll come to you second. Alex, you're first. Patrick second. George, then Rob.
Well, at the moment, the EU is more like a club of 27 countries. Its global view isn't actually that extensive. Everyone would like to think that the EU is everything in the world, and that's not actually the case. A lot of the people supporting Brexit want to have a more leveled playing field of the world and open up more to India, to Australia, to the United States, where from the United States, there's actually the EU benefits most in trade in comparison to China. There isn't a negative deficit in trade with the United States. So we would like to see a more level playing field and not actually just freedom of movement between the EU, but actually to be able to see a more fair system for people all over the world and regulated in certain numbers. So because this is, England is, Scotland using the whole UK, but England itself is quite densely populated. We do have to take this account when we look at the housing prices to, the earnings. So if you look at some of the graphs, I can't really show it up here, but you can look on Wikipedia. It's there for, the housing price issue in the UK. It's pretty high and it's only increasing. And if you look at the slope, that tangent, it's a very steep tangent. There is, some of these issues. And the thing is that we just want to make it fair, a certain number of what is sustainable. And there's another thing that we don't talk about, called the brain drain. I work at the university and all of the best students, come from Slovakia, and that's great. And the thing is that the EU is not actually allocating funds efficiently to make sure that infrastructure. So last year, Greece got 86.3 billion euros. 95% of that money, you can look on Zero Hedge that these numbers are correct, 95% of that money given to Greece was given to banker debts of who knows where. And that's actually one of the reasons why the Remain camp is funded by Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan. That is true, all those Facebook ads and YouTube ads are funded by them. They gave £600,000 last month. And the thing is because they want the UK to fund the ECB to be able to fund the debt that is unsustainable in countries like Portugal, Greece, Spain, and Italy as well.
Patrick.
Well, what was that?
No, it's not that it's bad. It's that it was given in a way that did not create infrastructure so that they could further develop their economies. To do some sort of development, build new air. No, they did not. They paid it to other bank accounts just for debt that should have been illegal in the first place. That's the problem. So right here, I can even give it to you to read here, if you want to see, 95% of the money given to Greece was not given to help them pay back further debt. We did not give them even a fishing rod. The only thing that actually their memorandum that they had to sign, if anything, required them to sell their fishing rod with the money that they got. They had to sell their airports. They had to sell their ports. They sold large land masses across the Peloponnese, huge ones that are just chunks. It's not as if the EU even did sustainable investment. You know, from the Green Party here, I cannot see how you can support an organization that made the Greek people pay so much, to have so much stripped away from them, without sustainable considerations.
I do not support for a moment the policies that were imposed on Greece, any more than I support crap economic policy run by the UK government, which bailed out the banks and did nothing to change their culture, which created a great deal of money out of nowhere with quantitative easing, but ensured that it didn't get invested in the real economy, but instead went into the casino economy and rebalanced the balance sheets of failed and still failing banks, and which is currently in a wave of handing over the right to build what should be our national infrastructure to the private sector. I would like to see private sector money taken out of a lot of politics, whether it's the pro-Remain or the pro-Leave side in this debate, or political party funding. I would like to see a great deal of private sector vested interest taken out of all of politics. But there is a real problem with this argument that leaving the European Union would solve any of these problems with a broken political and economic system. You have to change the politics of it. That's what I think we need to do if we want to build an economy that works for all of us. And that's what I think we need to do if we want to build a culture within European countries that works for all European citizens.
And Patrick,
with regard to the immigration question,
yeah.
which this came up, yes, the UK has a racist, a xenophobic attitude to immigration and to asylum. It has racist and xenophobic policies in place in relation to immigration and asylum, and all too often it is weak on rooting out racist and xenophobic people working in those systems, whether it's UKBA or now the Home Office. None of that is the result of our membership of the European Union. None of it is the result of the free movement of people within the European Union. And if we wanted to change our immigration and asylum policies in the UK, and be more open to those in other parts, coming from other parts of the world, or indeed those with relatives coming from other parts of the world, we could do that at a stroke. That is not in any way inhibited by our membership of the European Union. I had people in my office in a not exactly the same situation as you described, but a similar one. A young family, they just had their first child, and the husband is at risk of being sent back to Palestine. He's having to appeal against a refusal of a spouse visa, which he was entitled to under exercising his rights coming from Ireland, where they'd previously been living. Now, these people are being subject to an appalling level of treatment. They're being subject, as you described, to thresholds of their income. So we're treating wealthy people more favourably than poorer people, which is fundamentally unjust. We can change that. The UK can change that right now. None of these failings, none of them, are as a result of our European Union membership. And I fear that if we transferred the control over EU citizens' rights to the UK government, they would be subject to even more of the same xenophobic and racist policies and requirements that the UK government itself has put in place.
Alex,
just a moment. If the EU was so easy to reform, how come from the 72 reforms put forward since 1996, we can go through them, each and every one of these 72 reforms, up to 2015 when it was a give-up time, to see that they were all rejected?
Alex, none of the reforms that Patrick has just mentioned around immigration, around funding, have anything to do with you. They are not reforms of the EU. They are reforms of UK government policy, which are not inhibited by the EU. So I wonder if things are jumping quickly.
That is not the case. When the UK requested reforms from the EU did not reform.
We were talking about how citizens of non-EU countries are being treated. There's nothing to do with the EU.
Like again, we're talking about UK immigration policy, which is not affected by the EU, which the UK could itself reform and needs no permission or direction from the EU to do it.
Absolutely.
Of course.
So if I can jump in on some facts around sustainable development, around the brain drain, some stuff we can examine around that. I want to talk very quickly about the European Social Fund. So the ESF is cash that the UK receives as a member state of the EU to increase job opportunities, to help people improve their skill levels, especially those who find it difficult to get into work. The current funding, which runs until 2020, is worth about £4.1 billion. And that's just across England. There's a separate settlement for Scotland as well. And that's impacted directly 1.3 million learners since between 2007 and 2013. These are huge numbers. This is EU money going directly into communities, directly into transforming people's lives, directly into changing the society we live in. And the latest national figures show that colleges received more than 57 million in ESF income, and a lot of that was in direct European grants that didn't even go via the UK government. It went straight from the EU into colleges' pockets. And that was targeted as well. Most of it went to colleges in North. There were 10 colleges that received £41 million in ESF income in the 2013 academic year. If that's not the definition of sustainable development, of using EU money to transform communities, and of a collaborative community approach to improving the lives of European citizens through education, through collaboration across the continent, then I'm not sure what is.
Right, my table at the back's been very patient and they've got lots of questions. The man in the spotlight in the red, I'm going to take you because you've been up the most with your hand.
Yeah, I'd like to get back at Rob. At the moment, we pay in 20 billion in funding to the EU, we get back half. So roughly, we are funding the EU net to the tune of 10 billion. All of the figures that he has just mentioned are things that our own government could quite happily fund itself. It does not need the European Union to act as a middleman. Yes. And that's the fundamental thing. He's talking about the EU spending our own money that our own government could actually do a lot better than the European Union.
You're going to have to clarify for me what you mean by gets back. So when you say that the UK government spends a certain amount and gets half of it back, you're going to have to clarify for me exactly what that means, because so much of that money goes not back to the UK government, but back to schemes in the UK, to European-wide projects which directly benefit people living in the UK as well.
You pay a certain amount and a much smaller proportion comes back. I've been through these projects before. The EPSRC and BBRSRC are much more efficient.
Is the claim that you're making that money spent on projects which involve UK-based institutions and UK citizens, it only amounts for half of the amount that the UK government spends? Is that the claim you're making?
For the research grants and the research councils,
no, I was asking him for overall. If that's the claim you're making, we can get that checked.
I'm going to take the man who's waited for an hour to speak with the long hair. Thank you so much for waiting.
Thank you. I was interested by the initial comments Dr. Messina made regarding Framework 7 projects. I had the benefit of working on a Framework 6 project in my PhD, working with German car companies, working with Norwegian universities, and collaboration across Europe. This is at a time of declining research funds from the UK research councils. Those UK research councils are still having declining funds. So I'd like your view on what do you see as a future for research and research funding within the UK if we withdraw from Europe?
George, do you want a word in here?
That was directed to me because we were on similar projects in the past.
Far away.
So one of the reasons why they're on the decline is because that money is being funneled into the EU projects. So when we look at the money that's taken away from the BBSRC and the EPSRC, which would be the equivalent grant that you would have been on since you were working in automotive industries, whatever it is. So that money that is taken out from these UK-funded research councils that are funneled into the EU, we do not get a decent proportion back. And two, we have to bid for it, and the bureaucracy for that is an incredible overhead. If the proportion was at least 3/4, that would be fine. Or if you did not need a designated employee within each department to have to know the bureaucratic processes on how to bid through which council and which people to talk to. And there are countries within the EU that get more money for research than they put in. Austria is one of them. They're very famous for it. Why? Because they installed people, bureaucrats, into the EU during its research FP7 and FP6 series of projects so that they could bid directly to them. This is not how the EPSRC, when you do a grant proposal for them, it's 20 to 40 pages. I don't know how it was for a PhD, but for a postdoc, for a research associate, it was 800 plus.
Right, I'm going to take the two gentlemen here with the follow-on points, both white and the green, and then I've got a lady at the front, and I've got a string of 3 questions through here that I'm going to take. So, yes.
On Rod's point about there's no economic case against immigration, which he said
it's not a claim I made.
times.
I said they hadn't made any case against immigration, is what I said.
He said that they hadn't made a case against immigration. That's what he said. Not what I said, what he said.
No, he's saying
We have immigration of, the last figure was 333,000 net into this country. That's 250,000 per year. Now, all these people need houses, roads, cars, hospitals, schools. We're talking a medium-sized town or city. Now, there is always an argument that when immigrants come in, that they work hard and they don't take benefits, so they're net contributors. This is correct, but of course you do not include the figure that every immigrant who is working is preventing a British worker from working, and therefore every single unemployed British person has to have that dull money funded from the government. Therefore, net, it is not an economically viable model.
Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, as I've made clear at previous Skeptics debates, I am no fan of GDP, the way that we measure in narrow terms economic progress through growth alone. I think it's a fundamentally misconceived way of measuring the economy. But no, it's what I just said. But the idea that the economy is a zero-sum game, that everyone who comes to the UK from another European country and works is depriving somebody in the UK of that job is simply nonsensical. The idea that the economy gains a net contribution is about the generation of economic activity and the generation of employment, not just the apportionment of it. It's not about a fixed cake which is then shared out amongst more people. It's about a dynamic economy in which we see economic change as a result of migration. And this operates in both directions. This operates in the direction of people from the UK gaining the opportunity to contribute to economies in other EU countries as well. The final point I want to make is about housing.
Sorry, if you can have respect. Sorry, just let people can't hear at the front what the speakers are saying. So I know it's heated and people want their say, but if you can, whilst the speakers are talking, if you can remain quiet, that'd be great, please.
The final point I wanted to make about this is on housing. Yes, we have a housing crisis in this country. Very much of it is to do with house prices, particularly south of the border, particularly in the southeast, and particularly in London. That, again, is the result of UK economic policies. UK economic policies which have deliberately stimulated house price growth, which shores up the wealth which has been created by all of us in our economy, shores that wealth up in fixed, locked assets, and that's generated a huge intergenerational inequality, so that those who bought a property when times were good have ended up sitting on something that's worth far more than they invested in it. So, people in the middle have been left in negative equity, and people at the younger end find that owner occupation is unaffordable, social housing is unavailable, and private rented housing is all too often exploitative and overpriced. These are wrong-headed UK economic and housing policies. Yeah. It's not about blaming immigrants for a housing crisis that this country has created.
All right, okay, yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, I have here the paper from the Bank of England. This shows the occupational wages per group. So overall, immigration on the whole has a minor effect on the occupational wages. But what this conclusive study actually did is that it shows that for the people of unskilled or semi-skilled labor, they have had a drastic reduction. So if you look at the people and the anecdotal advice, and I'll read from you. Closer examination reveals that the biggest effect is in the semi-unskilled services sector, where a 10% point rise in the proportion of immigrants is associated with a 2% reduction in pay. These findings accord well with the intuition and anecdotal evidence, but do not seem to have been recorded previously in the empirical literature. The point made is that overall, yes, when a surgeon comes, and he's the best expert in spinal surgery or whatever it is that we need, of course, that's not going to make a drastic impact. But the anecdotal advice that people talk about, that a lot of people are getting shunned about, is real. And you can look at the Bank of England paper right here, staff working paper, The Impact of Immigration on Occupational Wages, Evidence from Britain, published in December 2015. You can read this to look at the actual effects that it's had on people and why the housing price per earnings has gone through the roof, and why you actually might see on Facebook and Twitter why people are upset, and at least show some understanding to these people who on the streets that we discuss, actually for the Leave campaign, they open up and say that they're struggling like they never did in the past.
It sounds to me like an argument for strong minimum wages in all European countries.
Right, there's been a lady at the front who's been waiting very, very patiently, and she's been very, very good. Thank you very much for waiting. Your question?
Thank you. I have a question on a subject that I've not heard mentioned in any EU debate, and it's about transport. It's a subject very close to my heart. We have a railway system in the UK that was privatised 22 years ago by the Tory government. We have in Glasgow certainly a bus system that's deregulated, it's run by private industry. When we talk about active travel, about walking and cycling, we always look to our neighbours in Europe to see how well they can do. And my question really is, if your side wins in this great debate, how will we improve people's health and people's wealth by working on our transport system?
Good question. Patrick, I'm going to start with you. Or Rob, one of you. You go ahead.
Well, again, I think there are a great many issues which are about UK decisions, not about the EU structures. But I think if we get past this referendum, I will continue to make a case for publicly owned and publicly regulated public transport services. Public transport should be seen as a public service. One of the threats to that does relate to the European referendum is the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership and other similar free market deals, which will make it much harder for European countries to renationalise things which have been privatised. So on both sides of the EU referendum debate, there are critics of TTIP and similar deals. But if we get Brexit as the result of this referendum, it's very clearly stated UK government intention to begin negotiating very similar free market deals on a multilateral basis with both the European Union and with other economic areas, other nations and economic areas around the world. So we need to win the argument for progressive politics on these issues. And I don't think that either a yes or a no vote, a remain or a leave vote in the European Union in itself guarantees progress or inhibits, makes impossible progress. But clearly, those who are arguing for a Brexit are looking to hand to the UK power to begin pursuing those kind of trade deals which will make it harder to renationalise and to regulate services which have ceased to be regarded as public services and have simply been regarded as free market commodities. I would like us to be in the position that other European countries are, with a publicly owned and publicly operated rail network and long-standing consistent investment in sustainable transport policies.
George.
If we get TIP forced upon us by the EU, what will happen is that the institution which we all cherish, the NHS, will effectively be destroyed. Yeah, that's exactly what's happened, because yes, well, you know, you can
get worse.
Because it'll be worse than you actually think it is. But you know, if you think that TIP is some nice thing, it's nothing to do with people. It's all about big business. And for Patrick to sit there and just talk to you as an opposition MSP and tell you that everything's terrible by the Tories and everything, that they're racist or xenophobic and all the other kind of stuff that he was coming out with earlier on, that is just him fighting the old Scottish independence debate. Yeah, it's Patrick. Yeah, that came and went. If Patrick was serious about Scottish, but the way he's going. But if Patrick's serious about Scottish independence, right, Patrick should be sitting on this side of the table. Yeah.
And George, the question was on transport.
Yeah, sorry.
The lady wants to know about transport.
Yeah.
France.
France?
Anybody want to talk about transport?
Well, the thing is about when you look at France and why France now has a 20-day rail strike, even though their euro is going to be there. If the EU had any intention of protecting workers' rights or protecting privatization, they had a long time to show it. In many of the countries, as soon as they become impoverished, they have to sell off assets to large corporations so that they can actually be eligible to get the bailout money that they requested. This is, if you look at the details of the people in France and the rail network, when you talked about, transportation, the rail network, look at the reasons why the rail network might be in chaos for the cup, for the football cup, when it's going to be coming very soon. And then when you look for transportation, look at Greece. I know we hammer in Greece, but it's the first victim of the problem of the EU. And if we just even focus, let's say, on Italy. Look at Italy, guys. It's a fantastic country. It has everything you could ever imagine. Olive oils, oranges, transportation, good weather, mountains, snow. It has Ferraris being produced, Ducati cars. It has good it has good archaeological sites, and it's suffering economically. It's in a deficit with the EU. And then we would wonder why.
Anyone in the audience with a follow-on question on transport? I'll take you at the back, and I'll take your friend in green because I've promised him. He wasn't there. He went to the bathroom when I was about to ask you a question. But we'll go with the man at the back in red, and then we'll go with the man in front of him in green. And then I know I've got an arc of 3 questions here that I have not, and I've got a lady over here as well. Okay? And anyone else, stick your hand up.
Has been the 4% capital spending limit that was imposed by the Maastricht Treaty on the EU member states. And that is one of the reasons why you have this privatisation of the railway system, the split between who operates the track and who operates the trains. So again, if we want to actually reclaim that, we have to leave the European Union.
Gentleman in green, who you've been very patient, yes.
Can I try to take back a few? Let's talk about Greece. Greece voted against austerity in the government election. The election guys in the platform stood against austerity, won that election. The referendum on it, they won the referendum. When the EU comes along and says you can't do that, what democratically unions would say to our country what you can and what you can't do? That's not democracy, that's dictatorship.
True.
Rob or Patrick with that one first?
Well, on the first point, I do think it's a little peculiar to argue that because the UK chose to privatise our railways and other European Union member states didn't and still have publicly owned railways, we have to blame privatisation of the railways on the European Union. That doesn't quite add up to me. And on the second point, I would absolutely agree again, as I have, that the economic policies imposed not specifically by the European Union itself, but by the Troika, by the member state governments of major European Union member states. Those economic policies I abhor, and the impact it's had on Greece. But it is worth noting that Syriza itself argues passionately not only for Greece to remain in the European Union, but for Britain to remain in the European Union as well, and for us to work collectively in a spirit of solidarity between European Union nations for economic progressive policies.
Alex, before you get in, follow-on question, lady there.
Yeah, so you're saying right at the start that our system is almost, you put it almost equally as undemocratic as the EU. And as the gentleman there pointed out, one instance of the EU ignoring the people of Greece in a referendum, I can point out 2 more. The Dutch and the French in 2005 unequivocally rejected the EU constitution. What was the EU response? They changed 3% of the document, and this was admitted by Giscard d'Estaing, who wrote the constitution, called it the Lisbon Treaty, and went right on regardless. Can you imagine if we vote for a Brexit? Seriously, I know there's been murmurings in the press, but can you seriously imagine the British government not taking us out of the EU? I can't. I'm sorry, I cannot. So I do not see us, I think it's offensive that you say we're as undemocratic as an institution that has a track record of ignoring the people. That is the ultimate expression of democracy, referenda and people speaking.
There are a number... there are a number of international bodies which have the legal power to require their policies to be adopted by member states. The EU is one of them. The World Trade Organization is another. There are a number of these international bodies. The EU is the only one with an element of democracy about it. It's the only one with a parliament, which we elect. That parliament needs to be more powerful than the Commission. It has grown more powerful over the years, and it will continue to do if we stay in it and argue passionately for that democratic reform.
I can see loads of hands. Alex or George, have you got a quick retort? Do you want to say anything to that?
Patrick's absolutely right. The EU has grown more powerful, but it's grown more powerful at the expense of the sovereignty of all the member states, and that is an absolute travesty. You know, I mean, for Patrick to sit here and defend them, you know, it's absolutely incredible. You know, I'm not a fan of the Tory government, but, you know, some of the things that Patrick said tonight, you know, is absolutely ridiculous.
And when you say that, you know, Syriza was promoting for staying within the EU, that's why Varoufakis and Tsipras, they had their backup plans. They even went to Russia to look for finances for the next 6 months to keep them afloat while they would exit the EU. They tried to exit the EU the best of possible. I don't even know.
Not the EU, mate.
Excuse me?
Exit the Euro. Don't conflate the two.
No. It was. If you actually looked on the referendum, it was both. If you look at it, it was not just one sentence for exiting the euro. It was for both, and that's why he went to Moscow and he had those negotiations.
The
with
idea
Vladimir
that they'd have
Putin.
been better off in Vladimir Putin's pocket seems bewildering to me.
Well, that's what that was up to them. It was up to them. It was their choice. Whatever it is that you're not going to put them on a leash to tell them what to do. Or if they want to just get some independent finance to have debt somewhere else that would have had a more humane debt structure. Well, what is it? When you look at the fact that Greece had 7,000 suicides last year, how is that humane? And when it was an increase from somewhere like 300 so many years ago, and nobody says anything about that. We talk about human rights, the EU, but no one ever speaks about that.
Right, I've got 6 brand new people who haven't had a question yet. And I'm going to take this arc here, and then I've got 2 here and the lady there. So I am aware of you, and I can see a new hand up. So I'm going to take these 3 questions, and we'll take another 3 questions. Hopefully we'll have time for all of those. And if we have time for you, sir, I'll come back to you, okay? Gentleman just in front of you who's been waiting longer than you'll go first, then you, and then the lady at the back. Yeah? Your turn, sir. No, the gentleman here, just right here.
Just a quick point to say that immigration is fundamentally a good thing.
Here.
Multiculturalism is fundamentally a good thing. The character of the Leave side has been laid bare. They're anti-immigration. They talk about people coming into Belgium, blowing their Belgium up. So my question is this: who is the main beneficiary of a Leave vote? Boris Johnson or Nigel Farage?
So we will come back to that, Alex. The gentleman behind you who had a question or potential follow-on one, yeah.
Well, now that the issue of sovereignties finally reared its head, I'd like to ask a more direct question. I currently can have laws and directives imposed upon me by people who I didn't vote for and who I have no chance of removing. Why, as a British citizen, should I put up with that state of affairs for any length of time longer than I possibly have to?
Good, thank you for your question. Lady at the back, you had a question as well. Lady in the T-shirt, yes. You did have a question, didn't you?
Yeah. I was just going to say that even the 2 European states that aren't in the EU, the part of mainland Europe, like Switzerland and Norway, they still pay to have trade agreements and to have some level of freedom of movement. Are they met laws? Do they met pay? Do they consider the benefits of the trade and movement to outweigh whatever? And would they still
Switzerland.
be part of the European economic area if we left the EU?
Alex, are you good to go on Norway?
I've got...
Or any of the other points that we've discussed. We've got immigration again, we've got sovereignty, we've got the interesting case of Norway and how they do it, because that might be an option available for us. Can you address that point?
So I can address the Norwegian one fantastically. I have a great. So first of all, why I'm looking for the exact piece of information here for you is that they actually implement less than 1/10 of the laws of the EU, somewhere around like 400 or something of the 5,000 plus that exist in the EU, because they love the bureaucracy like the something else. And the thing is that they're also they also have a seat on the WTO, the World Trade Organization. They also have a seat in every sort of international organization that the UK used to, but it gave it up because now it has the EU representing them, which the EU represents it as they wish, and we never actually even hear about it. I'll even just include here a little quote before I'm looking for my Norwegian thing right here from this man right here. This is Jean-Claude Juncker. He's the president of the Commission. I doubt, some people might recognize him, maybe not. No one ever voted for him. But it seems like the people for the Remain don't care about that, right? So I'll just... but the most important thing is, when it becomes serious, you have to lie. That's one of his great quotes. I'm ready to be insulted as being insufficiently democratic, but I want to be serious. I am for secret, dark debates. This is the president of the Commission, guys. This is the guy who writes the legislation. I mean, if we remain, yes, let's have him for who knows how long. You won't be able to choose that. None of us ever will. You would just reinforce them, that we would hold a referendum and re-support this type of thing. Patrick. How can that be good?
I don't know the source or the context of that quote.
It's
perhaps
Wikipedia.
It's something. Perhaps it's something. Perhaps it's something that the fact checkers could see if they can find a source for and a context for the quote. On the point of sovereign.
Do you want me to take the quote up there and then they can look it up?
I'm ready to be insulted as being insufficiently democratic.
Alex,
okay,
it makes their job.
There's
lots of red and green going up on the board if you want to have a little.
It would be interesting to know what the actual context of that quote was before judging it. On the point about democracy and sovereignty, which came from the guy over here, this notion that you as a British citizen can have laws imposed upon you by people that you didn't elect. That is true of the European Union, although people you did elect on a fair and proportional voting system have a role in shaping and indeed blocking those laws. So, for example, ACTA, which would have undermined digital rights across the European Union, was defeated by a combined effort of civil society and members of the European Parliament. So there is, as I said earlier, great imperfection with the level of democracy that there is at European Union level. But that argument that you put, that as a British citizen you can have laws imposed upon you by people you didn't vote for, is exactly true of the UK itself. The vast majority of us didn't vote for a Conservative government. They got just over a third of the votes in the UK election, and they got a majority in the House of Commons. None of us voted for anybody who sits in the House of Lords. And we have a great deal of political power vested in the civil service as well, which is not sufficiently held accountable. So the UK is a wildly imperfect democracy as well. And if we want to build a stronger, more democratic society, I believe that we need both levels of government, all levels of government that we continue to have involved in that debate, rather than the idea that we simply cut off one of them and pretend that everything is all perfect with the other. It's not.
Would you have preferred then that the UK government was formed by one of the parties that received an even smaller proportion of the votes?
I would prefer that we had a proportional voting system where everybody knew that their vote counted, and any government had to win a majority of a fairly elected parliament. That's how democracy is supposed to work.
You're more likely to get that to pass through in the UK than the EU.
Well, we have it in Scotland. I think we managed to hold a minority government to account. We've seen coalitions, we've seen majority governments. Why don't we have that level of democracy in the UK?
And something we have to be clear about is that, yes, the democratisation of the UK is absolutely vital, but that does not stand in contradiction to remaining a member of the EU.
Absolutely.
If we want democracy in the UK, we can have that and still be in the EU like so many more democratic states in the EU, but on other states that aren't in the EU and on democracy and sovereignty. The figure of 10% you referenced of EU laws and directives that Norway implements with 0% of the say. Is that more sovereignty? Is that more democracy? The money they pay into the EU and get nothing out of and are involved in none of the projects those fund, is that more democracy? Is that more sovereignty? We are asking a question about our role in international community.
George and Alex, I'm just going to let the audience in real quick. Gentleman at the back is very passionate about something.
Quickly on this subject, Patrick, we had a referendum. These are democratic processes.
we had a referendum and voted down the additional vote system. We did that in the previous Parliament.
Yeah, it was rubbish.
The system we have is the system that we've chosen.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
Gentlemen at the front, you've been waiting a long
A rubbish
time.
system that nobody believed in.
I'm going to let the gentleman here in. Yes.
This is into the Leave campaign. I've been seeing a few banners and posters recently, mostly in England, that basically claiming that Turkey is going to join the European Union at some point. Can I ask the panelists personally, do you believe that?
So Turkey joining the EU is the question. Do we believe that? And what issues does that raise, if it raises any?
So,
Alex?
I'd like to mention the Turkey.
Or any of the other stuff we've been
I'll
talking
mention
about.
Turkey and then go back to the lady's question about Norway with I've got a nice fact for her here. The discussions for for Turkey are done so secretively and so undemocratically. Nobody has any idea what is going on. I would be lying to say actually I've tried to find as much as possible to know what is going on. Giving 3 billion euros like this to a country which has human rights violations of the worst kind. They've only now accepted the Armenian genocide. These things are atrocious. Well, there was something in the EU Parliament. I'm hoping that there was a debate about it at least. The thing is with Turkey, it's so complicated and it's evolving. And I would like to know exactly what is, I mean, they're proposing visa-free travel. I'm not actually too sure. I mean, it's hard to find out.
Well, do you think it would be possible when Turkey is currently in the legal occupation of another EU state?
Because the thing is, they've passed over so many borders and boundaries for what is legal and what is not in the negotiations with Turkey. First of all, I mean, Patrick is talking about, the human rights. This one in, one out for people arriving on the Greek islands is a violation of human rights. The people coming and doing like a pick and mix and sending whoever they choose to go back on the boats back into Turkey, when it's on the border with Syria and to the camps that are unregulated. We don't even know if that's legal. First of all. So they do many things that are considerably illegal at the moment. So what is legal, what is illegal, and how they will do that, I wish, unless you're in that room, in that dark debate room, I don't think you'll know.
I can make it simple for you. Nobody is going to allow Turkey into the EU when it's in occupation of Cyprus. It's just not going to happen.
Cyprus? No. Cyprus has ceded its veto. You can check that out.
Well, then ask about Cyprus, ask about the other.
Excuse me?
Ask about the other states, not necessarily Cyprus.
Well, Cyprus was the last one to do it. I mean, everyone else has ceded their veto for the visa-free travel negotiation. Cyprus revoked its veto from that, so the negotiations are free going, and we just don't know. I mean, there's so much debate about Turkey, so many things come and go. It's a very volatile and dangerous situation. Very volatile, very dangerous, and I don't actually think the EU is handling it responsibly. I don't think they have a consistent policy. When you look at the V4 group, the Visegrad group, and how they've been approaching it, when you talk about walls and things, and you talk about the immigration borders, the V4 group is something else. But before, I just wanted to make one point about Norway. For the free trade that Norway can do, is that Article 3 of the Lisbon Treaty states that the EU must uphold free and fair trade with the rest of the world. This is legally binding. So if we leave, we can trade with the EU, and this wouldn't be a problem. That Norway's case is a positive case that we can reflect.
Norway still pays, though it still pays money out of the EU.
It pays more per head than we do currently.
Yes, but we think that those benefits of being out and being able to regulate and have open trade agreements with the rest of... No, it's not, because when you look at the amount of money that's just paid out, when you look at one benefit in the fact that the EU, imports more into the UK than the UK actually sells back to the EU, there's a huge trade. There is
Patrick.
Could I just respond very briefly on the question about Turkey? I would be profoundly surprised if Turkey became a member state of the European Union in the foreseeable future. I hope that in the long term they might arrive at a position where they are fully compliant with human rights, where they have ended the occupation, and where the rest of the European Union feels that that's a thing which is ready to happen. But it's not going to happen soon, in my judgment. But I'm glad I'm glad that Alex said one thing. I'm glad that he said, we just don't know. Because that is not what the Leave campaign are saying. The Leave campaign this week have been promoting material that says Turkey is joining the European Union. Now,
Well,
that is
1 month
a
ago it was
lie,
the case.
and I hope that we can end on a point of consensus with all of us, including Alex, condemning the Leave campaign for telling that lie to the voters.
It evolved. When they had transferred 3 billion euros, it was definitely on the card.
But the statement Turkey is joining
They
is
didn't
untrue.
they didn't give the 3 billion with the idea that they wouldn't get visa-free travel by maximum.
We're not talking
October.
about visa-free travel. The
No, no,
statement
no.
was Turkey is joining the EU, and that is false. That is a
We
lie.
said visa-free travel to the EU.
The statement was Turkey is joining the EU. That's
But
what
that
the
was
Leave
not put on
campaign
the date.
have been promoting.
That would be one of the speeding up. So I'll just clarify this to be
It's a
exact.
falsehood.
No. The visa-free travel is one of the few steps in progression to EU membership. They were given a clause of 32 things to adjust to be able to be brought back to the negotiation tables for EU membership.
A long-term negotiation is very different than the
but
statement
the
Turkey
visa
is joining.
Well,
Turkey is not joining.
Well, no. Well, if they're brought back to the negotiation tables and it's on the process and they've been given a time schedule and a timeline for these things, they've been given money and promised visa-free travel, it is on the agenda.
And yet you said yourself, we just don't know.
We just don't know the timing and for the visa-free travel. And the thing is, we do not know. Now, the thing is...
Stop digging, mate.
Wait, the money was given on those conditions. Things are changing, and there were a lot of problems. The Erdogan scandal with the comedian was something that probably a lot of people did not expect. It's a very volatile situation.
Right, we've got about 5 more minutes, and there's been a lady been waiting exceedingly patiently. Thank you so much.
That's fine. I think mine is more a comment on the previous topics that we discussed rather than...
Can you just give it a bit of a shout so we can all hear?
I'm sorry. I think mine is more a comment rather than a new question. I just wanted to clarify about Greece. Please don't compare UK and Greece. I mean, it's just not the case. We cannot make this comparison. Firstly, because Greece went into crisis not because of the European Union, but because of the Eurozone, if anything, connected to Europe and not its domestic policy. Second of all, can I just finish?
Of course, don't worry.
Second, the referendum that I had was not to leave the Eurozone or the European Union, it was for a bailout.
So, if I can make some point. Oh, you finished? Sorry, I thought you finished. Okay, go ahead.
And also, if you're talking about Varoufakis and Tsipras having their alternatives on leaving the EU or the Eurozone even, that is completely untrue. If you've read anything about Varoufakis ever, you will know that his main agenda was, let's stay in the European Union. It has a lot of problems, and I don't think that even the people who are defending the Remain side here today are in any way denying the fact that the European Union has a lot of problems. But he's saying, let's reform the European Union from within rather than outside of it.
Fantastic. Okay. Go ahead.
If the UK leaves the European Union, there was a relation made, there was a link made between Norway and a possible future of the UK. It's not really comparable. They're two very, very different countries with two very different economies, two very different labor markets and social systems. So you can't really expect the trade agreement that the European Union will have with Norway or Switzerland or any of the European countries that are not part of the EU would be even similar to that proposed to the UK.
That's quite a bit. Are you finished now? I didn't want to interrupt you. Okay, so I've got all those questions in my buffer. First of all, how did the European Union allow this financial collapse and meltdown to occur in Greece? So the ECB, the European Central Bank, is one of the branches of the EU. Okay? Draghi, who's the president of it, did allow all these countries, and when you talk about comparing the Greece and the UK, they're incompatible. Exactly that. There is a lot of incompatible economies and institutions within these economies that have been brought in too quickly. When Greece was allowed to borrow at the German rates through the ECB and have those interest rates, they were allowed to overlend. I'm answering your question. We can get back.
You're talking about the Eurozone Eurozoning then. And
The
not
ECB, the
European Union.
ECB is part of the European Union.
Yes, but the UK is not part of the monetary union of the Eurozone, so you cannot really talk about this way.
Oh, okay. So that's wait. You do not need to have the same currency to not be pivoted to the same economic system. It's called, when the exchange rate mechanism failed, there's something called the exchange rate mechanism 2, which Denmark is part of, and it pivots the currencies through the exchange rates so you can minimize the volatility within the euro area. So there's eurozone, and then there's euro area as well. So when you have these two things, you can actually pivot the economies. And when you have the common policies going for incompatible economies, you get these bubbles and problems. And with the EU having grown so fast from its initiation and so quickly, it's created a lot of problems that were unforeseen. I do not think that the EU idea, Patrick, is a wrong one, but it has been badly implemented. It has been implemented, it's caused a lot of problems for a lot of people. If we had stayed as the EEC a long time ago, that would have been fine. No one would have had a problem with rights or the migration of people and some of the basic things of trade. That would have been fine. But the expansion to 500 million people and the further growth now for more countries to enter when it's the Eurozone and the Euro area, European area, is in volatility is a problem. And the idea that Varoufakis didn't have one, you can look, if the gentleman up there will look for the Financial Times or for Reuters, Varoufakis Plan B. He had for his new currency, for getting out of the EU, and there was a lot of scandals on that. And you can see exactly what they had on their Plan B. And it's no coincidence that they had reached out to Russia and to I don't know how many other countries that they had for exiting in a full extent.
Right, we are going to run out of time, and I've not let this side have a go. So, Patrick, do you want in on this? Or Rob? Rob, you've been taking extensive notes. Do you want to dive in on this?
The thing is that, and as a central point, the EU has not shown itself to be a reformable body.
I think the main thing that I would say on this is about economic policies which I profoundly disagree with and disapprove of and will argue against, which are being supported by and pushed by the UK government. The economic policies which are in the ascendancy in Europe at the moment are the result of right-wing EU member state governments. They are not the result of the structures of the European Union itself. And the idea that we take some of the economic power, the regulations, the questions which are currently determined at EU-wide level on a multinational basis and simply hand those to the UK government, I think we can be pretty sure that the UK government will do every bit the same socially divisive, unsustainable, and fundamentally economically unjust economic policies in the UK, as we've seen imposed by countries like Germany and others on Greece. The argument for changing our economic policy is making a case for social justice, for solidarity between countries, and for the economic changes, investment in the future instead of austerity-based economics. That's a case that we all have to make in this country, across the European Union, and across the world. We don't achieve that by walking away from a union which has achieved a degree of success in the past and which can achieve more success in the future.
Would you
and if I can frame that slightly differently, extend that a little and frame it in a way that might be recognised by the people speaking on the other end of the table, there is profound confusion coming from this end of the table on democracy and sovereignty and what that means for member states to be part of the European Union. They say on the one hand that the EU dramatically disempowers states, but then they shout about the EU's supposed failure to impose or implement workers' rights on a state. What we're saying is that member states are part of the European Union, and where the European Union has been forced to take on policy around workers' rights, that has been used by workers and by trade unions to protect their rights through the European Court of Justice, through structures within our home countries where the EU can then intervene. But it does not mean that the EU is a super government imposing its will on everything that a state does. It is a democratic relationship between citizenry, a state, and a European community. And that's perhaps most highlighted by the fact that they are incredibly relaxed about the situation in Norway, where for the token of being outside the EU, where the only democratic interaction that citizens get is with their state, they're not particularly interested in how much Norway pays into the EU despite having no influence. And how much, 10%, you say, that's a huge amount for having no influence over EU directives and laws imposed on the Norwegian state. It's a collaborative enterprise. If we want democracy in the UK, we need a democratic UK government, but the EU is a mechanism for achieving that. It can empower us to change our country as well.
Right. We are running rapidly out of time. George, you have the final word before we go to the board. We've got a lot of, it looks just like this room, 50% red, 50% green. It does look kind of split down the middle. George, last word before we go over to our fact checkers.
Well, I would like to ask Patrick a question, since he's not particularly a big fan of the Westminster government. Basically, Nora, would you object if the powers were handed to the Scottish government?
I think it's pretty much inevitable if this was a Scottish decision, we would remain a full member state of the European Union. I think the opinion polling on that is abundantly clear. The question is, should these powers be handed to the UK government, to the Scottish government? Well, if they were, it's very clear that we would join the European Union as a full member state. Very clear. I don't think any opinion polling has found anything even close to a leave vote in Scotland.
Apologies for anybody I've not had time to get to, and apologies for not coming back to my good friend in the yes who kept waving, and I'm very sorry there. And for the team at the back, hopefully you all got a little bit of a mix at something. We're going to go to the fact check statements. We can continue this afterwards. The bar upstairs, we can move up there. If you want to quickly cool down outside on the street, come back in, or whatever you want to do. But we're going to go to the fact check right now. How are we doing?
All right, so, whoa, that's pretty loud. There we go. So when you're looking for facts and when you've only got enough Wi-Fi bandwidth for one laptop, you try and go for stuff that's quite discrete. So, not someone saying, I think X is good, but more quite discrete claims. And in credit to our speakers versus our recent electoral debate, we actually have facts, unlike the recent debate. So the first one we've got is the claim that we've spent 1.5 trillion since 1973. And it's kind of a mixed picture. A lot of this green and red is all within the one fact. So the ONS does list a gross expense of about $500 billion. However, that doesn't take into account the rebates, so the net figure is 380 billion, and I suppose it's a value call about whether that's an important distinction. Perhaps 380 is too much, or perhaps it being less than $500 billion is highly significant. I think that depends on where you fall in your opinion. Cancer expenses versus EU Union expenses. It's true in a strictly limited sense that the EU expenses are greater than the Cancer Fund. However, the NHS Cancer Fund is quite specific. It applies only to the cost of spending on cancer drugs. And I can tell you that, having worked in hospitals, a large part of hospital care, you're talking hospice care, doctors, nurses, qualified professionals, and all the other drugs that someone going through such a horrible illness needs. According to Aaron, it's also an additional fund for cancer drugs, so it's not even the whole of spending upon cancer drugs. The Greece money going to the banks. All the press sources we could find seem to kind of rally around the idea that less than 10% was used by the Greek governments, and that the most of the rest of that money was kind of going to banks.
That was a source from The Guardian, in case anybody cares.
20% of EU employees earn more than David Cameron. I'd kind of like that. Well, it's kind of true. The net pay is higher for this 20% of EU employees. However, it's also true that the tax is different. So it's not that they're taking home a greater gross pay than the PM. It's that perhaps they're receiving a lesser gross pay but being taxed less. Now, maybe that's a problem in itself.
Give you figures you want. The PM earns around 143,000 a year. The EU guys were 112,000 when you take it around, but because they pay a lot less tax, their take-home pay is higher than his take-home pay. Includes all the employees of the EU that we could find. The problem is the EU has not announced figures and given an overall public view of what they pay everyone, so it's kind of conjecture in that one.
They've not had their accounts okay for the last 20 years. There's been no auditor sign off on it.
So ESF funding for colleges. Yes, 57 million was sent from the EU, and 80 million of that was used in direct grants, which means to say that it went straight from the EU to the college without any middleman or person. An additional 224 million was paid by the EU in fees for 2013 to 14. And if you look at that sort of 57 million plus the research grants, EU funding accounts for about 3% of college funding for the last academic year.
It's a very small proportion of the overall funding, but it's looking at a tiny number of colleges.
Okay, well, we can't check that now, but so I'm going to remain mute on that last point. And then, all right, secret dark debates versus in red secret dark debates, and now the only black ink on the page. So we did find this quote. We found it on euroobserver.com, and we've got a link up there, and we'll put a picture of the board up, and you can all read about the secret dark debates. It seems to be a comment on the idea, or perhaps the fact, that if you're making frank speculation upon the economy in a very open and transparent way, that perhaps that will, in the financial market, that will affect the market. However, I'm not really sure about this. Aaron, do you want to read out the quote?
Pretty much. There was one interesting point, actually. The quote's been highlighted here was, "I'm ready to be insulted as being insufficiently democratic, but I want to be serious." And there's a pause. "I'm for secret dark debates." And this is Juncker on the constraints of openness from market actors during the financial crisis. Underneath, that also does say, it should be noted this comment has been considered a quip. Yeah, he also was talking about the fact that they talk about their monetary policy behind closed doors, so it doesn't influence the financial markets, because it does specifically mention the fact that the market will go up and down if you talk blatantly about what you're going to be doing.
Okay, and that's all our brilliant team of fact checkers were able to check. Can we give a round of applause for them, please? Thank you. Back to you, Mark.
When we do check facts, I mean, you've got to check them, cross-check them, and you can find different angles and different things. When you are out there, make sure you look at both websites, look at all the arguments before you make that crucial decision. Thank you so much. I was struggling just to keep up with where the hands were going. That's very, very impressive. Thank you very much. We're going to finish with closing statements, and I'm going to start by doing it the other way around. Do you want closing statements, or do you want to just... I'm looking out at you, and you're going, oh, we're purple, we're hot. Can we have very quick closing statements, because the audience have been very patient, and they're as purple as we all are, because it's very, very hot in here. So I'm going to start in the reverse order. Rob, very quick closing statements, because we need to get out of here. Thanks.
I think I made most of my closing statements before we went to the fact checkers, to be perfectly honest. But I think the same thing stands. If you think that the EU is a super government, whether a benevolent one or a benign one, you're wrong. And of course, if you take that approach, it looks bizarre, it looks incoherent, and it looks dangerous. But that's not what it is. It's the collaboration and the community of governments across Europe and the way that we work together. It's an organisation and a community that empowers people, it supports workers, it protects education, and it gives us vast opportunities. To walk away from that would be a mistake. Of course there are problems with it, as there are with democracy at every level in our institutions. But if we continue to fight to change that, and we do that together in solidarity across Europe, that is how we will build a better collaborative future, not by shutting ourselves away.
Thank you, Rob. If everyone else can be as brief as Rob, thank you, George.
Okay. The European Union isn't open to reform, and you can see that every single day when you look at the stuff online. I think tonight we've had a reasonably decent, lively affair, but I believe that you should make an informed choice come the 23rd. As I said previously, one of the things that you have to do is get involved. Politics is far too important to leave it to the hands of politicians. I believe that you will, on the 23rd, go in and vote Leave, the same as the opinion polls are showing that the majority of people in Britain will do so. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Patrick.
The European Union that I want to be in is not the European Union that we've got, but I think it is possible. The European Union that we are in has at least made our beaches cleaner and our air safer to breathe, has at least regulated the bankers' bonuses, much against the wishes of the UK government. The UK government is at the heart of making Europe worse, not better, from issues like bankers' bonuses to the financial transaction tax. The European Union that we are in is at least the most progressive voice that the planet has on climate change. Let's stay in it, not tear it to pieces. Let's fight to make it better and build the Europe that we really deserve.
Alex.
Once again, I feel the pressure from being the first and the last. But in the end, well, since I'm the last, I'll make a closing statement before I get to one last. Okay, sorry. So first of all, the most important thing about this referendum is that people are learning about the EU. That's the most important thing, that it's more than just, some trade tariffs and having visa-free transport between the EU states. It's much more than that. And whatever happens, the population and the people getting interested in it and learning about it is a plus. Having an educated population is the best thing you can ever have. People used to speak about healthy, but also educated, and this is fantastic. So no matter what you vote, as long as, people learn about it, awesome. But I'm going to leave with a quote by Patrick Harvie from the Herald, 14th of May, 2014. Few of us have any real idea how the European Parliament works. That problem isn't helped by the stream of anti-EU propaganda from the hard-right parties. The hard right are like the boogeyman. They're not that many of them, but they're kind of like the boogeyman to use, as an excuse whenever there's a problem for something, you like. But it is a complicated thing, and as long as we all learn some things about it, that's awesome.
I'd like to thank, it just remains me to thank the panelists for giving up their time. We had, hopefully, it was quite a balanced audience, quite a balanced panel, lots of really good stuff going on, and I'd like to thank you very much for turning up. One of the great things that's happened in the last couple of years is people have got really interested in politics. We get fantastic turnouts like this on hot nights. I think that's absolutely great. So thank you all very much for turning out. And a closing word from Glasgow Skeptics. Thank you very much.
Yeah, nice one. Thanks, everybody. So I hope what we did tonight has inspired you all to find out a little bit more about skepticism, particularly the brilliant work of the fact-checking board there. If you do want to know more, myself and a couple of the Glasgow Skeptics team are going to be in Kelvin Grove Art Galleries on Saturday and Sunday as part of the Glasgow Science Festival. We'll have a little stall to talk about science and have a bit of fun with some pseudoscience as well. So come pass by for that if you can. As I mentioned earlier on, sign up for our Facebook group. There's a mailing list, etc., etc. We've got loads of great events. Politics isn't the only thing that we like to apply a critical eye to. We like to apply a critical eye to all sorts of things. We've got 2 talks going on next week, bargain. Next Monday night, we're doing a joint event with the Scottish Secular Society when we're going to have a panel discussion about sectarian violence, shall we say. I know that's not a problem in a lovely place like Glasgow, but it's worth discussing anyway. And on Wednesday night, we have a science talk again. This is our talk as part of the Science Festival. We've got Sharon Moore from IBM coming to talk about the innovative work being done in the travel and transportation industry. And, plenty of stuff going on the rest of the month, which you can find out in our Facebook page and all that sort of thing. Finally, you will see the very handsome Aaron in the corner there, and equally as handsome Graham in this corner holding beautiful silver chalices. These events we do put on for free, but we do have costs to cover, such as website hosting costs, advertising costs. I'm sorry to say that Goldman Sachs don't pay for our adverts on Facebook. We have to pay for our own, and we have to cover all sorts of expenses, and we do like to buy our speakers a drink. We owe you a drink, guys, so don't forget that, I know you look thirsty. So you can pop some coinage or some folding stuff into the chalices there. We'd appreciate it, Again, we don't make any money from this. We're not going to use it to buy our passports or anything like that so that we can travel for free, Please, it's just to help us keep things running, Remember, if you could take your empty glasses and stuff upstairs as well, and remember, the Admiral Bar give us this place for free, so if you can thank them by hanging around and having a pint, that would be wonderful as well. Finally, please, can I have a huge round of applause to our moderator, Dr. Mark Shephard, for tonight. Yeah. a seriously difficult job to do, trying to keep an eye on everybody there. We reckon he's a kick-ass chess player, and we're going to find out later on. So thanks, everybody. Hope to see you at our events in the future, and enjoy the rest of your night.